situation in Germany is increasingly desperate. Although just a few months before his army had been characterized by its offensive capacity and by its grand strategies and military operations, at this moment the only thing required is a fanatical resistance without giving up an inch of territory. In this way, the time of the maneuver died, and immobility in the war of positions was established within the German army. This new panorama led to the fact that marshals like Manstein were no longer necessary, since the main thing at this time was to have men who would comply with the defense orders at all costs. So it can be said that the time had come for tough and implacable commanders like Ferdinand Schörner, who would strive to carry out any order from their Führer. Because of this, and after years holding minor positions, in May 1944 Schorner was placed in command of Army Group South Ukraine. There his mission was to protect the Romanian border from the imminent Soviet offensive, and to maintain the resistance in the port of Sevastopol, which he had guaranteed. However, he could not prevent the fall of Sevastopol, nor could he do much to defend Romania, for as soon as the Soviets attacked in the sector in August, the entire German front collapsed along with that of their Romanian ally. In any case, Schorner was not there to see it, for just a few days before this attack, he had been transferred to the northern sector of the Eastern Front, and in early August he took over Army Group North, which was fighting for its own survival. Although he could not stop the advance of the Red Army, nor save it from being surrounded, Schorner did manage to establish a defensive system on the Courland Peninsula, which remained resisting until the end of the war. In a similar way to what happened with Walter Model, who was another man who, like him, did not belong to the old Prussian aristocracy, Schorner began to deal with the most difficult and desperate situations. He was only expected to apply the toughest measures possible to maintain order, discipline, and defense. In this way, after months of hard fighting in Courland, at the beginning of 1945 Schorner is sent to protect Czechoslovakia and the upper section of the Oder River. On this date, the Germans were preparing for the final defense of their territory. One of the most famous measures that this general imposed and that he complied with total severity and without exceptions, was that every soldier who found himself behind the German lines was quickly tried and executed as a traitor. That led to the fact that the military police had to carry out many raids in the rear, and many German soldiers, even some of them innocent, were executed on Schorner's orders. When a man was found outside his post without any justification, this man was hanged with a banner saying that he was a traitor, who had refused to defend German women and children. The application of this type of measures without any type of mercy, which complied with the orders received from fanatical resistance, soon made Goebbels stand out above the rest, and publicly promoted it. So much so, that during the first days of April 1945, Schorner was promoted to Marshal, this being the last general to receive this promotion throughout the war. In addition, and as if that were not enough, Hitler included him in his will and bequeathed to him the position of Commander-in-Chief of the German Army, a position he held from April 30th to May 8th, 1945, without any kind of relevance. On the other hand, Schorner's last actions took place on the Nysa River, which was where his armies were overwhelmed by Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front, after which he was able to counterattack at Bautzen. After the fall of Berlin during the first days of May, the situation of Schorner's army group was critical. Basically, they had been isolated in the immediate vicinity of Dresden, and having received little attention from the Soviets, because their priority had been Berlin, it was clear that they were going to be the next target to be struck down next. This being the situation, Schorner had two options. The first was to continue fighting against the Soviets to finally end up being taken prisoner by an enemy that was not going to give him any kind treatment. The second option, this being the most recommended, was to go to where the Americans were and surrender to them, hoping in this way not to be executed at once or sent to Siberia. The last order Schorner received was from Admiral Dönitz, who was in charge of the new government in Germany after Hitler's death, who ordered him to stop the fighting and surrender, as he had agreed with the Allies. However, Schorner refused to comply with this order because it would mean being taken prisoner by the Soviets. So, After denying his men the chance to surrender or withdraw to the U.S. zone on the night of May 8, and to everyone's astonishment, Schorner dressed as a civilian and deserted. The marshal who had caused so many deaths to any men who had shown signs of weakness was now on the run from the Soviets. In this way, Schorner flew in a small Fiesler 156 Storch plane, in which there was barely room for him and the pilot, with which he headed to Austria. The reason that the marshal later gave was that he had gone to Tyrol to meet with Guderian, who had recently been dismissed and was in the area. With him, he supposedly hoped to draw up some plan to continue resisting. However, this meeting never took place, since Guderian already had everything organized to surrender to the Americans, and on May 10 he was taken prisoner. Subsequently, Schorner went to the vicinity of Munich and was camouflaged in the area until he was captured by the Germans themselves, and was taken to the Americans on May 18. Next, they tried to determine if Schorner had really deserted, or if there was some other reason why he had abandoned his men. The marshal affirmed at all times that the reason why he had moved to the Alpine zone was because Hitler had ordered him to do so in person in a meeting that he had had in his Berlin bunker at the end of April. That would be where Schorner was going to have to take charge of the last redoubt of German resistance in the fortress of the Alps. However, his story was not believed by either the Germans or the Americans, since everything pointed to the fact that the last marshal of the Third Reich had deserted. Having flown alone in an unofficial plane, without uniform and without orders from any superior, and having been caught hiding in a house in the Alps, he did not help to maintain his version. From here, Schorner had to face the brutal acts that he had committed during mainly the last year of the war. In June, the Americans sent him to the Soviet Union, where he was tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison, although he was finally imprisoned only until 1955. Later, when he was able to return to West Germany, he was retried for having killed so many soldiers, Germans, and returned to prison until 1960. After his release, he lived in Munich completely marginalized until his death in 1973, refusing during all this time to talk about anything related to his actions in World War II. It is curious how many attack Paulus for having allowed himself to be captured, while Schorner's desertion is forgotten. Can you imagine what would have been said if Paulus had escaped from the siege of Stalingrad in one of the last planes? If you want to analyze how the last combats of Marshal Schorner were, I leave you in the description the programs on the attack of Konyev in the Nysa, and the subsequent German counterattack in Bautzen. Thank you all so much for being part of this community, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you as always every Thursday and Sunday. See you soon.